Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some general channel discussion. Now, I know there are two reactions people have when you see channel announcement. The first one is people thinking, oh, is this channel shutting down? And the second one is people thinking, hey, GOG's posting a video on April 1st. I know what this means. Both of those reactions are wrong. No, I'm not closing the channel. No, this video is not an April Fool's Day joke. That just happens to be a coincidence. I'm posting this on April 1st because I have major social plans April 2, 3, 4, and 5, and as a result, I'm not going to be home, much less able to post a video. I'm putting this video out because I'm going to have to miss one of the major Path of Exile events that's coming up, which is Zizran's Class Gauntlet event. This is an awesome event, and it's one that tends to run once or twice a year. It is going to be starting in a week's time, and it is Path of Exile 1 on Extreme Hard Mode. So have a look at Zizran's Class Gauntlet event right up down in the description below if you're interested. But this is hardcore solo self-found with a lot of nasty rules that make the game harder. And ultimately, for a couple of hundred of you out there, you're the best players in the game, you know you're the best players in the game, you are going to be thinking of this as a chance to compete for prizes and a chance to prove how good you are. For everyone else, there's a chance to have some fun playing the game in a very different way where you've got to be extremely careful all the time, where any mistake can be your last one, and as a result, you've got to be constantly paying attention, constantly vigilant. If that sounds like fun, or even if it sounds like fun in moderation, then Zizran's Class Gauntlet is coming in a week's time. It's great. Unfortunately, I'm going to be missing it, and that's because I've been working on two side projects, one of which I've announced before, but I'll mention again, and one of which I haven't really talked about much on this channel. Let's start with that. So I was approached by someone that I knew from the Path of Exile community who had a job offer. This was going to be working on an upcoming ARPG. This is The Dark West. Now, I have been working behind the scenes a little bit on The Dark West so far, and I'm expecting this to ratchet up a fair bit. This game is not out yet, but I'll put a link down in the description below to the website for the game, and you can have a look at what's coming up and wishlist it on Steam if you want. Now, this is not an advertisement for The Dark West, but just for full disclosure, I do have an employment relationship there. With The Dark West, I have been working on designing some of the core game systems. There's a few things ARPGs do really well, and there's a few things I feel like games do because it's the way it's always been done. For example, resistances, going from 0 to 75, getting nerfed at various points throughout the campaign. This has become an ARPG trope. But does it need to be that way? Could we find a better way to do it? Well, that's something we've worked on. We've come up with an entirely new system for resistances that I think might just be a little bit more complex to understand, but once you understand it, I think it's going to play a lot better, because in the Dark West, you can scale your resistances as high as you want. Going from 100 to 200 in a resistance is a meaningful stat upgrade. Going from 400 to 500 is still a meaningful stat upgrade. You don't have to deal with any of the complexities that come in when you're trying to get above 75. You also don't need to deal with both escalating and diminishing returns and various caps and the like. No, if you can get more critical resistance or if you can get more curse resistance, it's just kind of always a good stat. Another thing is not making some of the mistakes other ARPGs have made, where they've had to have the most convoluted and hard to explain experience point systems in the game. We've decided to go with something much simpler there. Anyways, I did an interview where I was discussing a lot of these things with Safarian, who's also working on the project. I'll put a link to that down in the description below, and that's over on the Dark West channel. But if that sounds like something interesting, then you can definitely find out more about that on the Dark West website. Once more, for full disclosure, this is not a paid ad for the Dark West. The company director doesn't even know I'm making this video, but at the same time, I do work for them, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about the game. The second thing I have been working on the side is something that is much more of a personal project, and something I'm much less likely to make any money out of, but this has been a fiction project that I've been working on for a while. Something that really captured my mind. Back in the 90s as a teenager, I read all of the Wheel of Time books, at least all the ones that were out at that point, and more of them would obviously come out throughout the noughties, and I think the last one came out in 2012. And while I was reading them, one thought stuck in my mind. There's a thing that's hidden away. It's not something that's an important plot point, but there's something in the background cosmology of those books where time is a loop, and there's 7 ages. The story is set at the end of the 3rd age, and there's a number of hints that the 2nd age was a tech magic utopia. But there's also really subtle hints that the 1st age was actually the period of the Cold War, so the period where Robert Jordan started writing the series. And they're very, very subtle hints, and they're not key plot points that would spoil the series for you, but it got me thinking, okay, so there was a transition that took place from the period of the Cold War through to this high-tech magic utopia. What was it like to live through this transition? And that was the thought that would eventually develop into the fiction work that I'm working on, Archangels of Phobos, which is a lit RPG science fantasy web serial that I'm working on currently. Anyways, I'm planning to do a more traditional Royal Road style text-based release of it, but I have also been self-narrating it as chapter by chapter, and we've currently got something like 20 odd chapters, which I'll put a link to down in the description below to the YouTube channel that they're on. This is probably something like 35 to 40% of what I imagine the first book in the series to be. Anyways, slight flashbang warning for the next image. But this was a story that really started consuming my mind, and I started writing it and started getting further and further into it. And now I feel it's in a spot where it's definitely not perfect yet, but it's at a point where it's a bit better to pick up than it was when I first mentioned it on this channel a while ago, when not as much was written. And so that's the two things that I've been working on. One that's more for myself, and one that's more traditional paid work. That's the reason that I've been a bit busier than I would like to be, and I'm going to have to miss some fun things like the Gauntlet, but I thought I'd give you all an update. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.